Dr. Toya, step away from the desk and keep your hands where I can see them.
I signed what the telemedicine company sent me. That doesn't make this fraud.
You signed more than 7,900.
Once is a mistake. Twice is suspicious. Dr. Sophie Toya signed more than 7,900 brace prescriptions across 6 months and billed Medicare over $6 million doing it. The federal agents behind this camera already have every one of them.
Brace orders in 6 months.
Those patients requested
Some
help.
never spoke to you. Some got 4, 5, even 12 braces. That is not medical judgment.
She would not get the chance to explain. In just 6 months, this Bloomfield Hills physician had signed her name to more than 7,900 orthotic brace prescriptions for over 2,600 Medicare patients. Many of them she had never spoken to. Some of them could not walk. One of them was confined to a wheelchair with a spinal infection that required surgery, and Dr. Sophie Toya prescribed her 5 braces anyway. That single prescription became the piece of evidence that ended her medical career, cost her $120,000 in forfeiture, and sent her to federal prison for 4 years. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. When your doctor signs a prescription with her name on it, how much of your trust is riding on the assumption that she actually looked at your chart? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button. We break down these healthcare fraud cases every single week, and the ones coming up this month are worse than anything you have seen. Sophie Toya was born in April of 1968 in Detroit, Michigan, the middle of 3 children in a household where education was not encouraged so much as expected. Her father had immigrated from Osaka in the early 1960s to take a mechanical engineering position in the auto industry. Her mother taught first grade in the Detroit public school system for 31 years. The family lived in a modest brick colonial on Argyle Crescent in the Palmer Woods neighborhood, and Sophie was the daughter every parent on the block used as a comparison point for their own children. Neighbors remembered a quiet, disciplined girl who walked to Gesu Catholic School with a leather book bag and came home each afternoon to spread her homework across the dining room table before dinner. She played the violin. She helped her mother with the younger sister. She did not go to sleepovers. Her bedroom light stayed on until 11 every single night, and when a neighbor once asked her father why he was so strict about it, he shrugged and said Sophie was the one who set the timer, not him. Sophie graduated valedictorian of her class at Mercy High School in Farmington Hills in 1986, and she left Michigan for the first time to attend Northwestern University on a partial academic scholarship. She majored in biology, minored in chemistry, and worked 20 hours a week in a genetics research lab under a professor who wrote her one of the strongest medical school recommendation letters of his career. He described her, in the exact language that would later surface in the federal sentencing memorandum, as one of the most single-minded and precise undergraduate researchers he had supervised in 20 years. She was accepted to Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit in 1990. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on 2nd Avenue, 10 minutes from campus, and she paid her rent with a combination of scholarship money and Saturday shifts at a coffee shop on Cass. Her medical school evaluations were consistent, meticulous, thorough, occasionally reserved with patients, but exceptionally strong on documentation. She completed her residency in internal medicine at Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak in 1997. And joined a small 3-physician primary care practice in Southfield the following year. For the next 15 years, Dr. Sophie Toya was a boring, uneventful, entirely respectable internist. She saw patients with high blood pressure. She managed diabetes cases. She wrote preseason physicals for the local high school hockey team. She married a radiologist she had met during her residency, a soft-spoken man named David Preston, and they bought a colonial on a cul-de-sac in Bloomfield Hills in 2001. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who both attended Cranbrook Kingswood. By 2015, Sophie had left the group practice and opened her own solo internal medicine office in a small professional building on Telegraph Road. She kept a light patient load. She saw her regulars. She sat on the board of a community medical charity in downtown Detroit. Her state license had never received a single complaint. Her malpractice carrier considered her one of the lowest risk internists in Oakland County. She was, by every external measure, exactly the kind of doctor that Medicare's claims processing architecture was designed to trust. That trust would eventually be worth $6.3 million to the wrong people. To understand what happened to Dr. Toya's medical career, you first have to understand the specific machine she plugged herself into. That machine is the Medicare Durable Medical Equipment Reimbursement Pipeline, and it processes tens of millions of claims a year for the 65 million Americans on Medicare. Wheelchairs, oxygen concentrators, walkers, continuous positive airway pressure devices, and, critically for this story, orthotic braces. The rules of the system are straightforward on paper. A Medicare beneficiary needs a piece of durable medical equipment. A licensed physician evaluates the patient, determines that the equipment is medically necessary, and signs a prescription order documenting that clinical judgment. A licensed supplier fills the order, ships the device, and submits a claim to Medicare for reimbursement. Medicare's claims processing system reviews the claim, verifies that a licensed physician signed it, and pays out the money. That last step is the one that matters. Medicare's payment architecture depends on a legal and clinical presumption that any prescription bearing a licensed physician's signature reflects that physician's actual medical judgment. The system was built for volume, 1,400 claims per second at peak processing periods. There is no human being at Medicare reviewing each individual brace order to confirm that the doctor really did evaluate the patient. The signature is the check. The signature is the entire foundation. That architecture creates a specific vulnerability, and by the mid-2010s, a category of criminal operator had figured out exactly how to exploit it. The formula was elegant in its cynicism. Step 1. Run deceptive television commercials on daytime cable channels aimed at Medicare-aged viewers. The commercials advertised a free back brace, no cost to you. Medicare covers everything. Step 2. When the viewer called the toll-free number, a telemarketer in a boiler room somewhere in Florida or the Dominican Republic would collect the caller's Medicare number and personal information. Step 3. The telemarketer would upsell. If the caller had any pain anywhere in their body, they were told, Medicare would also cover braces for their knees, their wrists, their ankles, their shoulders, their elbows. It was free. It cost the caller nothing. Step 4 was the essential piece. The scheme needed a real doctor's signature to make Medicare pay. The telemarketers routed the patient information to companies that called themselves telemedicine providers, and those companies then paid physicians a per-prescription fee to sign the orders. Step 5. Brace supply companies filled the orders, shipped the braces, and billed Medicare at wildly inflated rates. The braces themselves cost the supply companies between $30 and $80 each. Medicare was billed anywhere from $600 to $1,400 for a single brace. Every signature on every prescription was worth hundreds of dollars in profit to the people running the pipeline. And the entire operation collapsed if a physician somewhere refused to sign. The physicians almost never refused. They were paid on volume. And in Dr. Sophie Toya, the operators of this specific pipeline found a signature they could rely on. The first payment landed in Sophie Toya's account in the spring of 2017. It came from a company registered in Florida that called itself a telemedicine services provider. The wire transfer was for $11,200. In exchange, Toya had signed a batch of prescription orders for orthotic braces that the company had prepared and forwarded to her electronic signature portal. She had reviewed none of the underlying patient files in any meaningful clinical sense. She had spoken to none of the patients. She logged into the portal, clicked through the signature interface, and moved on with her day. That was the first month. In the second month, a second batch arrived, then a third. By the end of the 6-month conduct window that federal investigators would eventually reconstruct, Sophie Toya had signed more than 7,900 orthotic brace prescriptions for more than 2,600 Medicare patients. She had been paid approximately $120,000. The federal investigators would later reconstruct the volume in daily units, and the numbers do not read like the practice pattern of a physician exercising clinical judgment. They read like the output of a signature stamp. On one single day inside the conduct window, Dr. Sophie Toya signed 136 brace prescriptions. 136 patients in one day at a solo internal medicine practice that had never seen more than 15 scheduled patients in a normal day. To sign 136 thoughtful clinical prescriptions in 8 working hours would have required Toya to review each patient's chart, evaluate their symptoms, confirm medical necessity, and document the encounter in under 3.5 minutes each, without a single bathroom break, without a phone call, without lunch. She did not do any of that. She was clicking. She was clicking through a queue. For nearly 1,000 of the patients whose names passed through her signature portal, Toya prescribed 4 or more braces. For at least one patient, she prescribed 12. Braces for the neck, the back, the shoulders, both wrists, both knees, both ankles. 12 pieces of medical equipment, all shipped to a single Medicare beneficiary, all billed against a single physician signature, all based on 0 clinical contact between the physician and the patient. The volume was not the only anomaly. The federal investigators eventually seeded the pipeline with undercover agents. 2 federal investigators posed as Medicare beneficiaries and called the toll-free number. Their information was routed through the telemedicine company. Their files landed in Dr. Toya's signature portal. Both agents received phone calls. Both phone calls lasted less than 60 seconds. In one of the recorded calls, the agent was on the phone with Toya for exactly 47 seconds. She asked whether he had pain. He said yes. She said the braces would be shipped. That was the entire clinical encounter. Within 72 hours, 5 braces were on their way to each of the undercover agents. Medicare was billed. Dr. Toya was paid. At her home in Bloomfield Hills, life continued as it had before. She and David took their daughter on a college tour of the East Coast. They upgraded the kitchen. Sophie began a Saturday morning cycling routine with 2 friends from the neighborhood. Her husband later told federal agents that he had noticed the additional income and had assumed his wife had taken on consulting work with a telemedicine startup. He had asked her about it exactly once. She had said the paperwork was complicated, but the reimbursement was straightforward. He had not asked again. No one at her office noticed either. She never brought the work home in any visible way. She never printed a single brace order. Every signature was electronic. Every payment landed in a business account she had opened for this purpose alone. No one noticed. No one checked. The catalyst that ended Sophie Toya's medical career was not one moment. It was a national one. In the summer of 2019, the Department of Justice announced a coordinated nationwide law enforcement operation targeting the entire architecture of telemedicine-driven durable medical equipment fraud. They called it Operation Rubber Stamp. The name was chosen with deliberate precision. It described exactly what physicians like Sophie Toya had been doing. The operation was the largest healthcare fraud takedown in the history of the Justice Department at the time it was announced. Federal prosecutors indicted dozens of physicians, telemedicine executives, and brace supply company owners across 17 states. The aggregate loss to Medicare was calculated in the billions. The pipeline that Toya had been feeding, 1 prescription click at a time, was being disassembled by federal agents in every jurisdiction where it had touched down. The specific chain of events that surfaced Sophie Toya's conduct began with a wheelchair. In late 2018, a home health aide in central Michigan opened a cardboard box that had been delivered to her patient's front porch. The patient was a 73-year-old woman, a retired librarian, who had been confined to a wheelchair for the better part of a decade, and who was at that moment in the middle of a serious health crisis involving a spinal infection. Her doctors were preparing to schedule surgery. The infection was in her lumbar spine. She could not walk. She could not stand. She could not, in any physical sense, wear the equipment that had just arrived at her house. The box contained a knee brace, an ankle brace, a back brace, a wrist brace, and a shoulder brace. 5 braces, all shipped to a wheelchair-bound patient with an untreated spinal infection. All prescribed by a physician the patient had never met. All billed to Medicare for a total of $3,883. The home health aide called the patient's actual primary care physician. The primary care physician called Medicare. Medicare's fraud referral desk logged the complaint and forwarded it to the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. The complaint was flagged, cross-referenced against the Operation Rubber Stamp target list, and routed to an FBI special agent in the Detroit field office, who was already investigating the telemedicine company that had submitted the prescription. The prescription was signed by Dr. Sophie Toya of Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. The federal case against her had just begun. We are about to walk into the investigation. Before we do, if you have made it this far, take 1 second and hit subscribe. This channel exists because these cases matter. The trial that ended Sophie Toya's career took 8 days and produced a factual record that is genuinely difficult to look at, and we cover cases like this every single week. Stick around. The evidence gets worse. The FBI special agent assigned to the Detroit portion of Operation Rubber Stamp was a 15-year veteran named Reina Alvarado. She had worked healthcare fraud cases out of the Detroit field office since 2011, and she had a reputation among assistant United States attorneys for building meticulous, document-driven prosecutions. The Toya case was going to require exactly that kind of prosecution because Sophie Toya had never sent an incriminating email, never texted a co-conspirator, never met a telemedicine executive in person, and never spoken about the arrangement to anyone in her personal life. What she had done, which was more damaging than any of those things, was leave a paper trail. Alvarado began with the electronic signature logs from the telemedicine company that had routed the prescriptions. The company had been raided in a parallel investigation, and its servers were now in an FBI evidence facility in Northern Virginia. The signature logs recorded the exact date, exact time, and exact IP address of every prescription Toya had signed. When Alvarado pulled the 6-month conduct window and sorted the signatures by day, she found the peak volume days. 136 signatures on a single day in September of 2017. 98 signatures on a different day in October. 72 signatures on a Sunday. She cross-referenced the timestamps against Toya's own office schedule. On the September peak day, Toya's practice had seen 11 scheduled patients. The remaining 125 signed prescriptions had been generated during periods when Toya was either not seeing patients or was actively in the exam room with a different patient. The bank records were even more damning. Alvarado subpoenaed the account records for the business account Toya had opened in April of 2017. The account had received $120,475 in wire transfers from the telemedicine company over the 6-month period. The account had received no other deposits from any other source. It had been opened for this purpose alone. Then Alvarado went back to the wheelchair patient. The federal case would eventually be built on many prescriptions, but one prescription had to carry the moral weight of the conviction, and the wheelchair patient's file was the one that carried it. Alvarado obtained the patient's actual medical records from her primary care physician. She obtained the spinal infection diagnosis. She obtained the imaging that showed the patient could not walk. She obtained the surgical consult that had been scheduled 2 weeks before the box of braces arrived on the front porch. Then she pulled Sophie Toya's signed prescription for that patient. Attached to the prescription was a mandatory certification form. Toya had checked the box, confirming that she had evaluated the patient. She had checked the box, confirming that the patient was mobile. Both attestations were false. Both had been signed under penalty of federal law. The wheelchair patient case became count 1. On the morning of March 4th, 2020, 3 federal agents pulled into the driveway of the Colonial on the cul-de-sac in Bloomfield Hills at 7:12 in the morning. Dr. Sophie Toya was in the kitchen in a dark green cashmere robe, drinking coffee from a mug her daughter had brought her from a college trip to Boston. Her husband was upstairs in the shower. The dog was at her feet. She opened the front door with the mug still in her hand. Special Agent Alvarado identified herself, presented the federal search warrant, and asked Toya to step outside so that the search team could enter the home. Toya set the mug down on the console table in the foyer. She did not immediately speak. The body cam footage from that morning captured a short exchange on the front porch. Alvarado explained that the warrant was related to prescriptions Toya had signed on behalf of a telemedicine company. Toya nodded. She did not appear surprised. "I know what this is about," Alvarado asked her to clarify. Toya's answer was measured. She had been expecting the conversation, she said, since the day the Justice Department had announced Operation Rubber Stamp on national television. She had watched the press conference from her living room. She had understood, immediately, that the operation was going to eventually reach her. "Dr. Toya, before you say anything else, I need to advise you of your rights." "I understand." Alvarado read Toya her Miranda rights. Toya listened. When Alvarado asked whether she was willing to answer questions, Toya paused for a long moment. She looked past the agent, out toward the mailbox at the end of the driveway. She said one sentence. "I would like to speak with an attorney." That was the last thing Sophie Toya said to a federal agent without a lawyer present. The search team spent the next 6 hours inside the house. They seized her home laptop, 3 external drives, a filing cabinet in the basement, and the electronic signature token she used to authenticate prescriptions in the telemedicine portal. When they left, Toya was still standing in the foyer in her robe. The coffee mug on the console table had gone cold. Dr. Sophie Toya was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Michigan in December of 2021 on 1 count of healthcare fraud and 5 counts of false statements relating to healthcare matters. The indictment was signed by Assistant Chief Rebecca Yuan and trial attorney Chris Wenger of the Department of Justice Criminal Division National Rapid Response Strike Force. Toya was released on a $50,000 unsecured bond. She surrendered her passport. She agreed to voluntarily suspend her medical license pending trial. Her defense attorney was a former federal prosecutor named Mark Sullivan out of a downtown Detroit firm. Sullivan's strategy was to argue that Toya had been misled by the telemedicine companies, that she believed the patient information she was being sent had already been medically vetted, and that her signatures reflected a good faith trust in an intermediary that had misrepresented itself. The strategy required the jury to accept that Dr. Toya, an experienced internist with more than 20 years of practice, had not understood what she was doing when she signed 136 brace prescriptions in a single working day for patients she had never met. The trial began on May 1st, 2024. It lasted 8 days. The government called 17 witnesses. Special Agent Alvarado testified for a day and a half about the signature logs, the bank records, and the electronic timestamps. The undercover agents who had spoken with Toya for 47 seconds testified about the recorded phone calls. And on the 6th day, the wheelchair patient's daughter took the stand. She testified about her mother, about the spinal infection, about the surgery that had eventually been scheduled and, mercifully, performed, about opening the box on the front porch and finding 5 braces her mother could not wear. She testified for 18 minutes. When she stepped down from the witness stand, several jurors were visibly emotional. 2 were openly crying. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On May 10th, 2024, they returned a guilty verdict on all 6 counts. Dr. Sophie Toya sat expressionless as the verdict was read. Her husband was in the second row of the gallery. Her adult son sat next to him. Her daughter had not come. At sentencing on June 26, 2025, United States District Judge Denise Bergman delivered a statement that would appear in newspaper coverage across Michigan the following morning. She addressed Toya directly. "Dr. Toya, you were given something very few people are ever given. A medical license. A community that trusted you. Patients who assumed that when your signature appeared on a prescription, it meant something. You took all of that and you sold it, 1 click at a time, for $120,000. You attested that a woman in a wheelchair could walk. You certified that patients you had never spoken to needed medical equipment they did not need. The federal government does not send physicians to prison for making mistakes. It sends them to prison when they lie under their license, deliberately, for money. That is what you did. Judge Bergman sentenced Toya to 48 months in federal prison. She ordered restitution in the amount of $3,606,935 and forfeiture of the $120,475 in kickback payments. Toya was ordered to surrender to the federal prison camp at Alderson, West Virginia by August 15, 2025. Her medical license was permanently revoked by the state of Michigan in September of 2025. The Colonial on the cul-de-sac in Bloomfield Hills was listed for sale in October. Her husband filed for divorce the following month. The Justice Department has now prosecuted more than 100 physicians under Operation Rubber Stamp. Sophie Toya's case is often cited in Medicare program integrity training as the archetypal example of what physician signature kickback fraud looks like at the peak of the 6-month conduct window. 7,900 braces, 2,600 patients, 136 braces on the peak day, 12 braces for a single patient, 1 wheelchair. She was clicking through a queue, and every click, in the end, was a signature under federal law. This case was hard to sit with, but the case on your screen right now is worse. Click it, and I will show you what I mean.